Okay, so it is middle of May, so more than likely your school year is wrapping up. So it is a good time to go through some data analysis at the end of the year, just to see how your students did. And you can even track their growth throughout the year. We'll look at some ways you can do that. So the first tool that we have is a class progress report, and I'm going to go through some information about a few things, and then the second half of the webinar, the last 10 minutes or so, I'm going to log into the site so you can actually see what all of this looks like as if you were to log into your account. So our class progress reports are great because you can track your scores by standard for the class. It shows you the total number of questions that your class has answered by standard. And your progress report by default takes into account everything that your students have done since the very beginning of the year, so since August 1st. But we do have some different filtering options that might be helpful. So for example, if you only wanted to view test and benchmark data, you don't necessarily want to see practice activities or videos, you can always pick and choose what you want, and you can also set a specific date range. So that way, if you wanted to compare, one quarter or semester to the next, you could switch your date filters and see how those scores by standard have changed throughout the year. And so what this looks like in your account is your progress report. You have your list of standards behind here. So let me go back. And your scores. And then with this gear icon, that's where you can go and switch your date range and what kind of activities you want factored into that. So again, we'll go through that in more detail on the live site in just a few minutes. Also within your class progress report for each class, you have a graph available as well. So that way if you want something more visual, you can access it there. And that is a really good way to instantly see your student growth from one month to the next. So we use a dot graph, and it's pretty easy to understand as far as your scores by month. And let me just go ahead and go to the screen. So here's an example of a graph. You can see it's by month, and the size of the dot is determined by the total number of questions that your students answered for that month. That way let's say you had 100% one month, but it was only based on maybe 20 questions because you kind of took some time off from the site and you just had a student who went on and did some work on their own. So it's not really a great reflection of your class, but then you have the larger dot, which maybe represents, a few hundred questions. So it's a better data set. So that's just a quick visual to see the total number of questions answered per month. And then the horizontal line, that shows you what the overall average is for the school year. And we're looking at the overall content area, so it's averaging in everything. But you can go into specific standards and track from one month to the next. You can even pull up an individual student graph. So we have lots of different options there if you haven't ever checked it out before. It's kind of neat. You can also easily print or download or even annotate and make notes directly on the graph itself. Okay, then the second area I want to go over is a student time tracker that we have, and this is something that's only available for admin accounts, but I did want to go over it even if you don't have an admin account. That way, if you ever need this kind of information, you can go to someone at your school who does have an admin account and let them know where to find it, and they can always export exactly what you would need. But within the admin area, there's a time tab just dedicated to total time tracked on the site. And we have different filters there. So if an admin needed to see all the time that students have spent for 6th grade math, they could filter it down just to 6th grade math. They could factor in a specific date range. You can even search for specific students if you need to see their time. Again, we have an export option. And our time on the site is always calculated from the time that students click to begin an activity till the time that they finish and submit that activity. So if students are just logged in but they're not doing anything currently, then that time is not being calculated. Here's an example of what that time tab looks like. Again, you have your list of students, and you can see their total time broken down by test, which would include practice test and benchmarks, all the different practice activities, so practice questions, performance tasks, vocabulary, all of that's factored in there. Then you have games and video time. So all of that can be, looked at a glance. And again, you have your different filters up here, an export option. And so that way, if you ever need that report, you have it, handy for you. And then the last piece of information I want to go over is benchmark comparison. Benchmarks on our site are probably our most popular feature, just because you can create a custom assessment, which is especially helpful if you've used benchmarks as some form of pre-test and then a post-test. You can actually compare two benchmarks so that you're looking at the results all in one place, so you don't have to go back and forth. And so I'll show you how to do this. One tip that I have, because we have some teachers who ask this, is which benchmark, does it matter the order, which one I choose first to compare? And it does if you want to see progress in the right direction. I would go to your newer benchmark first, and then go to options, choose compare, and then choose the older benchmark that you want to compare it with. And so when you are comparing benchmarks, you can see the change, hopefully increase or decrease by standard. You can see that overall for all your students and then by individual student as well. And comparing benchmarks is an area that we definitely want to improve for our development list, hopefully over the summer. And so this goes for really anything. But if you have any specific suggestions, especially as we look to make improvements and make changes, you're more than welcome to send us a feedback from the very bottom of your page. When you're logged into the site, you can send in a feedback through that feedback and contact button, and you can let us know exactly what would be helpful. And we really do look at every single one of those that come in, and we can use those ideas as we make enhancements for next school year. So this is an example of comparing two benchmarks. I can see the two benchmark codes that I've chosen to compare, and obviously our system will only let you compare two similar benchmarks. So if you have two that don't have enough overlapping standards, it's not going to let you. So when you go to compare, it's going to already have selected which benchmarks are eligible to compare that one to. And then over on the right, I can see the change in each standard. So the light green indicates the growth from the first benchmark to the next. I can see the actual percentage improvement in each standard as well. The one by student is a little bit more confusing, and this is definitely something that we have plans to change to make it a little bit more clear about what exactly you're looking at here. Because what you're looking at, again, this is an individual student, and I'll show you where to find this. But you're looking at each standard and if they increased in their score or decreased, or maybe had no change at all. So this first one, again, the light green represents change. So they increased 100%. So really this can mean maybe the benchmark only had one question for this particular standard. They didn't get it right on the first benchmark, but they got it right in the second. So they were able to increase by 100%, 1 out of 1. And this one plus 0%, but it's already filled in. That means that they already had, maybe they got the only question right, so they already had 100%, and there was no change. So either they got it right or there wasn't a question for that particular one, so there was no change. Here there's no change, but the student didn't get it right because there's nothing filled in. So they did not get the question right the first time, and they didn't get it right the second time. Here they improved 50%, So now their score is up to 100. The only area where they went down was this use precise language where you see a minus 25%. So this one to me is a little bit harder to understand, and this is why we want to make it better. But the student on the first benchmark got all the questions right because it was up to 100. But then if you just think about some basic math here, there were probably 4 questions total for this standard. And on the second benchmark, they missed 1. So they've decreased now 25%. So they have a 75% proficiency for that standard because maybe they only got 3 out of 4 questions right instead of 4 out of 4. So that's kind of the way to understand it. Again, that's definitely on our list to improve, but it can still give you some useful data the way it is now. And I do want to go ahead and get logged into the live site to show you all of these things, and then we'll follow up with Q&A time. And there's also a very brief 1-question survey when you exit today. It's just asking for feedback not only about this webinar, but if there's any webinar topics that you'd like to see offered next school year, because we try to offer these free webinars every month, and you can sign up for them even if you can't attend. That way you'll still receive all the information and a recording. So if there's something specific that you'd like to see, you can let us know in that survey. All right, so let me go ahead and switch over here. I'm logged in as a teacher, and let me go ahead and show the first thing, which is the progress report. And just in case you're new to the progress report, on your main classes tab on your homepage, this middle icon is your progress report. So if you click on that, you'll have to choose your content area if you have more than one content area associated for that class. And then that's going to load all the different standards, and you can see your scores over here on the right. So this is taking all students in the class, all activities completed since August 1st. It shows you the total number of questions that were correctly answered out of the total number attempted. And you can see what the actual score is. And we use a color-coded dot rank system, which you can click on dot rank there, and it will let you know what the different colored dots represent, and just an explanation about what's included here. But if you click on this little gear icon over in the top right, this is where you can access your filters. So if you only wanted to see your test data, let's say you want your test and benchmark data from the beginning of the year until, let's say, halfway through, you can switch it and load it. And so now I can see a lot of those dots have changed. There's not nearly as much filled in. And so you could actually then, go to your browser and print this progress report. That way you have a copy of it. And then you could go and change your date range. So now if I want to view the second half of the year, I can go from January 1st till now and load. And now I can see all that data that's been added in just for test and benchmarks for what I've chosen. And so then I could print this. We don't have a way where you can compare 2 date ranges side by side. So you will have to, change it each time in order to be able to view that. But that's an easy way that you can track, your class progress from one time period to another. And we also have the same thing by individual student. I'm not really going to spend a lot of time here, but it's the same information if you needed to see it broken down individually. You have that gear icon. Again, you can tweak your date range, and you can add in whatever activities you need to, and then you can reload that data. Now, your progress report graph is going to be the last tab. And this is where you can track from one month to the next how your class overall has done. And if you hover over a dot here, you'll see the actual average score for that month. So for October, I have 28%, and that's based on a data set of 67 questions total that students answered. So then I can go through month by month and be able to look at that change. You can also filter this down to specific standards. So here in Georgia, every state has different names, but we're based in Georgia, so we call them domains and elements. It might be indicators, reporting categories, whatever it's called for your state. You'll see it there. And so this way now I can actually track each month what these scores were for specific standards. And if it gets too busy, because depending on your content area, you might have a lot of standards here, you can just click on the key at the bottom and that's going to remove anything that you don't want to see. And then you can just add it back by clicking on it. So that way you can get exactly what you want. And then over on the right within this little download looking icon, you can download this as a PDF if you want to. You can print it or you can also annotate, which is pretty nice because that will allow you to actually make markings on it and then you could print or save that copy. So again, that's something that we hope will be useful, that you can actually just visually track that student progress throughout the school year. Okay, next I want to go ahead and go to the admin section very quickly. So I'm going to go into admin and I'm going to go to the time tab. And this is pretty self-explanatory. There's not too much here to go over, but by default you're going to get all students for the entire school. So if somebody needs a report, again just for a specific content area or even just a specific grade level, you can filter that down a little bit better to look at the students who you need to. And then you have their time. You can always export to Excel. If you just click export, it's going to export only the students on that page. But you have to select all students if you want it to export everybody. So that is there for you to see. You can also filter just by clicking. So here, let me go back to all students. So if I want to see the student who has the most time, I can click on any of these here and it's going to show me the top time. So for this student, I clicked on test. So this student has the most test time on the site throughout the year. And again, if I wanted to filter that down to a content area, you certainly can do that, but all of these are clickable so that you can sort to see which students have the most or least amount of time spent on the site. And then the last thing I want to go over is the benchmark comparison. So let me go to benchmarks. And again, this is most helpful if you have two very similar benchmarks that you maybe use as a pre and post test, especially if you've duplicated a benchmark to reuse it. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a benchmark, and again I'm going to choose the newest one first. And I'm going to go down to compare, and it's going to already have pre-selected which benchmarks are eligible to compare that one to. So I'm going to go to the one that I want to compare it with. And you'll click to compare selected. And again, we have plans to revamp this, but for what it is right now, you'll have your overall average between both benchmarks at the top. I'm hoping we'll change that to where you have the first benchmark average and then the second benchmark average over here on the right, so you can see each of them not combined. And then over here on the right you have your scores by domain. So this will actually show the growth, and you can break that down further by standard to give you a better picture. And now keep in mind, unless you're comparing a benchmark that has exactly the same standards, you might be looking at a benchmark that had slightly different standards. So maybe there was let me try and find an example here, like this one, 100% growth. It's possible that this standard wasn't on the first benchmark, but it was on the second. So it would help to know a breakdown of the two benchmarks that you're comparing before you start looking at this, just so that you're not looking at data that might be a little bit misleading. So then down here you'll have your grade distribution chart. I can see my benchmark scores for the first benchmark compared to the second. So the second, was definitely an improvement. Then for individual students, you have the list of scores for the first benchmark that you're comparing with the second. And one potential flaw in this is that it is factoring in students who maybe only completed one, not both. So if you have specific feedback about that, if you think it's helpful to only have students who've taken both benchmarks, then again, just send us a quick feedback here. You can send a general question comment and let us know, because those are the kinds of things that we're trying to evaluate as we make changes here. But for a student, let's say, who did complete both benchmarks, because if I am only looking at a student that only completed one, I'm not going to get any idea for growth. I'm just going to see their scores by standard according to that first benchmark. So if I pick a student who has scores for both, that's where I can see the changes by standard. And again, I already kind of explained this, that if you see plus 100%, that could very well mean that the student didn't get the question right the first time. In that standard, they got it right the second time. Or maybe it was never a question on the first benchmark and they got it right for the first time on the second. And again, the light green is areas where there is an improvement. The pink is where the student did not perform as well. So that's where you can see individual student growth. And then the last thing that you have here is your dot rank. And this is going to take both benchmarks and combine all that data together so that you can see the student scores by standard based on both benchmarks here. And then we always have this feature where you can assign remediation practice based on those weakness areas. So if you want to, give your students some additional practice in the areas where they scored the weakest, you can do that. And again, it's factoring this information on both benchmarks together versus just one at a time. So that's the benchmark comparison feature. Again, if you have specific suggestions, just let us know through that feedback and contact button. And I know it's about 3:24, so we're about 25 minutes into the webinar, so I do want to go ahead and wrap it up in case you need to go. All right. Excuse me, I am going to stick around in case you have any questions about anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be about what I went over, but keep in mind that you will receive a copy of this recording and a link to that presentation. That way you'll have it for future reference in case you need it. And I appreciate your time this afternoon, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And again, just be on the lookout from me for that email either later today or tomorrow morning.